We are so looking forward to bringing you this live event this afternoon or morning, depending on your time zone. We're just going to give it a few minutes to let folks get connected. And in the meantime, if you want to just drop in the chat where you're tuning in from, how many people are watching with you. We'd love to hear from you while everyone's coming online. Awesome. Waterford, Wisconsin. Earth science class. Oh, that's awesome. It's so nice to have you guys with us. Yeah, you can use the Q&A function or the Zoom chat as well. Main chat is disabled. Oh no, hold on one second. Let's see. Thank you for telling me that, Melvin. I'm going to get our IT folks that should be able to open that back up for you. Oh. All right. Gabe, were we able to get that set?
Everything is set.
All right. The main chat should be open now.
And now it's past 2 o'clock. I will start the webinar. I will hit record.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're recording all of this. So to those people who have just joined, thank you so much again. We're really excited to bring you this live event. It's actually one of 2 live events we're going to be hosting with Ariel today. If you want to drop into the chat or into the Q&A where you're tuning in from, how many there are of you, if you're a classroom of 30, if it's, you and your cat, we'd like to hear that too, or dog. We just want to hear where y'all are from, and we will get started. Oh, we will get started and bring you this great live event with Ariel Waldman. So we've titled this, It's Not All Snow and Ice. So to start off, I just want to give you some background. My name is Sarah Eckert. I'm a communication specialist for the Office of Polar Programs at the National Science Foundation. So I work with amazing scientists like Ariel on a daily basis to learn about Antarctica and also the Arctic. So just some housekeeping. Everyone is muted and videos are turned off. Connectivity is a huge issue in Antarctica. So we just want to make sure that you can see and hear what Ariel is saying. Please drop any questions into the Q&A box on Zoom. After Ariel's presentation, we'll go through and we'll just have a great conversation. Also, this webinar is being recorded following the event sometime next week, likely, because it is a Friday. We'll be sending an email with a link to the recording so you can rewatch it. You can share it with your friends and family, as well as links to other resources that you might find interesting about the topic. So what are we talking about today? Today, we're going to be talking with Ariel Waldman. She has been out researching at the McMurdo Dry Valleys. So the McMurdo Dry Valleys is one of the very few areas of Antarctica that is not covered in snow and ice. It's about 4,500 square kilometers. So I think that's around 2,000 square miles in size, very large area. And it's about a 30 to 45 minute, right, Ariel, helicopter ride from where Ariel is, which is McMurdo Station. McMurdo Station is one of 3 research stations that we at the National Science Foundation have permanently in Antarctica. So a little bit more about our lovely presenter, Ariel. She is a amazing science communicator and researcher. She has been to Antarctica twice 3 times. I'm sure she'll tell you. And she is studying some of the tiny microscopic organisms that live in the soils of the McMurdo Dry Valleys. So I'm going to turn it over to Ariel to introduce herself to everybody. And as you can see, she's going to pull up her slides, but as you can see, she is in a nice, beautiful, cold environment. So Ariel, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me get my slides going here. All right. And hand warmers back on. It is a cold day here in Antarctica, which is to be expected, but this is the summer, so this is as good as it gets. And I'm a bit in a wind tunnel today, so if I'm a bit shouty, apologies. And if you see my nose drip, well, that's the Antarctic experience for you. But I always like to start my talks with this image because I love it so much. It's from one of my favorite spacecraft that's going to the outer reaches of our solar system and beyond. And I love it because if you can see in that stripe of orange band up there, there's a little bright pixel. And that little bright pixel is actually Earth as seen from 4 billion miles away. So I always like to say, that's where you can find me if you need me. But the reason why I love images like these so much is because it really shows how space exploration and science especially are really unique ways of changing our perspective of ourselves and our place in the universe. And a lot of my work focuses on how we can change our perspective both of ourselves when we're looking to outer space, but also at the microscopic level. And so, as some of you may know from if you've looked me up at all, I actually don't have a formal science background. I went to art school. My degree is in graphic design, and that's a lot of the work that I did, and I love. But I've done also a lot of work on the science side, working with NASA, coming here to Antarctica, and I think that's also another way in which we can change our perspective of life here on Earth is by merging science and art and doing really interesting collaborations between the two. So Antarctica, it's a place that a lot of people don't often think about. It doesn't show up in most maps. But Antarctica is an amazing continent. It's so underestimated, I would say, is the way of putting it. The size of Antarctica is the size of the US and Mexico combined. Actually, it's even a little bit larger than that. So it's this massive continent that people don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, with the exception of thinking that, you know, penguins live in Antarctica and they're super cute, but there's really nothing else there other than penguins. So I sought out to kind of change our perspective of Antarctica as being a place that has a bit more than penguins and actually is full of lots of life if you know how to look. And so I knew I wanted to go to Antarctica, but with a background that wasn't formally trained in science, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. And I came across the National Science Foundation's Antarctic Artists and Writers program. And it's this amazing program that sends artists and writers to Antarctica to do amazing work and interpretations of the land. You can see in these pictures, you have people sitting out in the middle of Antarctica, drawing pretty pictures. But I knew, even though I went to art school, that probably wasn't going to be me because I'm not that great at drawing, it turns out. I love design. I love being creative. I'm not a great illustrator. So I knew I wanted to apply to this program, but for me, I wanted to figure out how I could contribute as someone who's not a traditional illustrator. And so in talking with a lot of researchers who come down to Antarctica, I learned that there's lots of biologists who come here who study the microscopic life that lives in the dry valleys and all over Antarctica, but they photos or videos of these creatures. So there's this entire ecosystem down here that very few people ever get to see, even though we know a lot about it. And so I fashioned myself as a wildlife photographer at the microscopic scale, or a wildlife filmmaker at the microscopic scale, in order to help researchers understand the behaviors of the microorganisms here, but also help people around the world just get more familiar with the fact that there's a lot of life here that isn't penguins. So this all sounds like really great, and like I had it all figured out, and that I had a plan and I was going to do it. It took me 5 years of applying for this grant before I was able to actually get the go-ahead to go to Antarctica. So it was a long journey. But once I got that approval to go to Antarctica, this is how I felt. It felt pretty amazing. It's funny, I'm in this wind tunnel right now. It's super cold. And I actually don't like being cold that much, but I was so excited to go to Antarctica, and I'm still so excited to be here. And frankly, in the background, I might be hearing some helicopters, and that's how we get out to the dry valleys, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So once I got the go-ahead to go to Antarctica, the way you go is by military aircraft, and those military aircrafts don't have any windows except for this very tiny porthole. So this was the very first time I was able to actually see Antarctica with my own eyes and look out the window and just see the glory of it. And it's really unlike anywhere else on Earth, which is really just amazing. And so my initial project in Antarctica on my last expedition was to study life under the ice. And so as was being said at the top of the hour, Antarctica is covered in snow and ice. 98% of Antarctica is covered in snow and ice. And so my first project was looking at life under the ice. And this is a picture of a fishing hut that's on the sea ice, but it's not used for fishing. It's actually used for divers to dive underneath that really thick sea ice and explore all the creatures that live under it. So this is a diver going into the dive hole of 9 feet thick ice. And then you can sort of see getting lowered into the ice what that's like. But it's a really freezing cold job to do that. And so there's another way to explore under the ice, and that's through a metal tube that gets inserted into the sea ice. And this is a video of me getting into this metal tube and going down, down, down under the sea ice. And then you can see once I get to the bottom, there's this beautiful illuminated ceiling of sea ice, and all those little dots, those are all fish. And so you can see all of the life underneath the ice in this ob tube. This is what that tube looks like from the outside. It's this weird metal tube, and you sit there suspended between the sea ice and the sea floor. And you can realize that even though being a diver in Antarctica is an incredibly cool job, it's just amazing because there's just sea spiders, sponges, seals.
Well, as happens in Antarctica, sometimes there is some tech problems. Oh, she's back. All right, Ariel, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. It's so windy, the cord pops out. So I'll just keep coming back if that happens. I'm going back to sharing my screen. And then let's get to the right slide. We were here. And then sorry for all the helicopter noise. All right. Okay, so welcome to Antarctica. It's a wind tunnel. There's helicopters, lots of activity. So this is a microscopic creature known as a sea shrimp, also known as an ostracod, and it's one of the microorganisms that's below the ice. And it's just an amazing, beautiful creature. Other creatures that live under the ice are diatoms, which are microalgae, which have glass shells in these really intricate geometric shapes. Absolutely beautiful. And other creatures I went on my first expedition here to look at that live in the ice actually live inside the glaciers themselves. And so we hiked up this glacier. It was my first time hiking up a glacier, and there's these little places on the glacier known as craggonite holes. And that's when like pieces of dirt and sand get blown onto the top of the glacier, and then they begin to melt down, and then it ices over the top. So you can see we took an ice core here, but at the bottom of that ice core, there's a dirt puck, and inside of that dirt puck is all sorts of things like tardigrades and rotifers and other creatures. And so it's this amazing ecosystem that lives inside the ice itself. So this is an example of some of those creatures that live inside these glaciers. These are rotifers. They're just these amazing microscopic animals. They are actually animals that live inside the glacier. There's also ciliates that you can see them poop. It's kind of funny to watch. And then this is spiral cyanobacteria that also exists inside the glacier. So one of the other places I went to look for life that's inside of a glacier is Blood Falls. And Blood Falls is a really unique feature in the dry valleys of Antarctica. It's actually a subglacial lake, and the subglacial lake has iron inside of it. And so if that works out on top, it hits oxygen and turns into iron oxide and turns bright red. So you can see why it gets the name of Blood Falls. But what's fascinating about Blood Falls is the fact that over 100 years ago when it was discovered, people thought it was red algae. And then they later discovered, no, it's not algae, it's iron oxide. But then for a very long time, they thought there's nothing that could possibly live inside the subglacial pond. It's dark, it doesn't have any oxygen, it's twice as salty as the ocean. Nothing could possibly live there. But only in the last like 15 years or so, they've been able to discover that there's actually bacteria that live in the subglacial pond. And it really changes our perspective of how life survives here on Earth and really where the edges of life are. So this is a drone footage of Blood Falls that I shot this season, showing kind of how it looks from an aerial perspective. And it's just really, it's a monument both to nature, of being so unique. There's really no other place like this on Earth. And also being a monument to science of people being determined to actually keep investigating it and learning that there's actually life that exists inside of it. So the project that I created for my first expedition to Antarctica is Life Under the Ice. And so you can go to lifeundertheice.org and see all of these videos of the creatures that live in the dry valleys and also around the sea ice of Antarctica, and you can like watch their behaviors, learn more about them. And it's really giving me the feeling of what it's like to put a petri dish under a microscope in Antarctica and get to see all the creatures that live there. So yeah, as I said, that website is lifeundertheice.org. It's a really great resource and just really fun just to look around and get to know the creatures that live in Antarctica. So the topic of this whole talk is that Antarctica isn't all snow and ice though. And so Antarctica, as I said, is 98% snow and ice, but the largest area of Antarctica that is not covered in snow and ice is the McMurdo Dry Valleys. And it's where I went last time, but it's especially been the focus of my work on this expedition that I'm here for right now. I've been in Antarctica for the last 2 months, mostly going to the Dry Valleys to film a docuseries supported by National Geographic to tell the story of the Dry Valleys from multiple orders of magnitude. So I've been here with this team, nicknamed the Worm Herders, also the Soils team. They're part of the McMurdo Dry Valleys long-term ecological research team. And they look at climate data and environmental data, ecosystem data over the last several decades in order to see if there's any changes that are happening to this really unique ecosystem. And so this is what the Dry Valleys looks like from a helicopter. I'm glad there's a helicopter sound in the background here, so you get an idea. Imagine being in a helicopter and seeing this. So this is what the Dry Valleys is like. There's not a whole lot of snow and ice. There's not a whole lot of glaciers or frozen lakes. There's a few here and there, but not many. And then you can see as this turns around, this is actually the Antarctic ice sheet coming into Taylor Glacier. You can see what a stark contrast it is from the Dry Valleys to the ice sheet and just how different of an environment that is. That's the, behind me is the New Zealand helicopter that's taking off. So McMurdo base and New Zealand base are actually like really close to each other here. So there's all this traffic from both New Zealand and the US that's behind me. So as I was mentioning, I'm building this docu-series looking at the Dry Valleys from multiple orders of magnitude, partially inspired by the Eames's Powers of 10 video that came out several decades ago, but it was kind of the first of its kind to explore and tell scientific stories that are looking at life from both the atomic level out to the galactic level. I won't be looking at anything that extreme, but I am looking at the microscopic level out to satellite view and orbital views of Antarctica. And so this is examples of the macro footage that I've shot while down here. And this is the soil that's in the Dry Valleys. It's so incredibly important. You might think soil, you know, what's the big deal? But the way life survives in the soil here is fascinating. This soil in particular, you can see it's a little wet, and it's those thin films of water around these little granules where life exists. So they all exist in water, but sometimes in these very thin films of water. So this is a wetter example where we can find life in the Dry Valleys. This is a microbial mat, which I always like to think of as a slimy layer of microbes. So microbes self-organize into these microbial mats that then support life. So you get different kinds of microorganisms at different layers, and they're all kind of feeding on each other and getting light from the sun. The way I like to think about it personally is that microbial mats are kind of like the coral reefs of the Dry Valleys. They're this protective housing for a lot of creatures to be able to survive the extreme wind and cold here. So this is some of the creatures that you can find in those soils and in those microbial mats. Cute, super cute tardigrades like this one. Tardigrades, if you don't know, they're also nicknamed water bears. They have 8 legs. They have little claws. They have eye spots, so they can't fully see things, but they can sense light. And they're just adorable and so fun to film. They're amazing creatures. And these are also microscopic animals, so they are actually part of the animal kingdom. This is another example of a tardigrade of a different species. This is a predator tardigrade. So this tardigrade actually will feast on nematodes and other forms of life that aren't just like cyanobacteria or moss. So this is kind of like the big lion out here in the Dry Valleys that's like on the hunt, looking to see what it is. And it's amazing. To give you a sense of size, this is probably like a 3/4 of a millimeter big, which is pretty large. The other tardigrade was probably closer to 1/4 of a millimeter in size. Other creatures, I mentioned nematodes. So this is an amazing nematode known as the Plectus species of nematode. And in this nematode, it's got a bunch of eggs. Those eggs are actually clones of itself. So this particular type of nematode doesn't reproduce sexually. It creates clones of itself, and it's able to do that in slightly more stable environments. Environments that are less stable, creatures usually have to sexually reproduce in order to get enough genetic variation in order to survive. So this is an example of one of those types of nematodes. This is the Scottnema nematode. This is the only nematode that's endemic to Antarctica. So you can only find this nematode here in Antarctica. You can see it sort of like gulping down a bunch of water. And it has a spiky mouth, and they're just really amazing creatures. Other amazing creatures are rotifers, also microscopic animals. This one kind of has like a Roomba mouth, and it's using that to sweep in different particles. And then you can see something eating inside of that, inside of the rotifer. That's not its heart. That's actually kind of its esophagus and jaws gulping down food. Other types of life in the dry valleys are able to survive by really taking cover. So this is a hypolith, which is a rock that has life underneath it. And so you'll see here in a second that if you pull up lightly colored rocks in parts of the dry valleys, there's actually green life that lives on the underside of it. And it does that because it's able to get just enough sunlight through the top of the rock. The bottom of the rock shelters it from the cold and wind, and life is able to survive that way. Other types of life that live in the rocks of the dry valleys are known as endoliths. So endoliths are little microorganisms that live inside the rocks themselves, so not on the underside, but inside. And so this is Beacon Valley, and the lighter colored rock that you can see here is sandstone from a beach that existed in the Jurassic era that got condensed over time. But because sandstone is such a porous rock, microorganisms are able to actually take shelter inside of the rock itself and still get enough sunlight. It's a little bit more humid inside of the rock. And again, they're sheltered from the extreme colds here. So that's how life is able to survive in some of the most extreme locations. And Beacon Valley especially is most often acquainted to being one of the closest places you can get to being on Mars here on Earth. So this is what I love about Antarctica and space exploration and science and filming all of this stuff with an artistic lens in general, is just getting that different perspective of our place in the universe, but also our place on Earth and the different creatures that we share it with. And so this is an example of my macro lens that I was filming some of those shots of the soil with. And really, there's just so many amazing things here if you know how to look and you kind of change your perspective. So with that, I'm going to share a couple of resources here at the end. So if you are ready to take screenshots or write this down or take photos with your phone, please feel free. So one resource is Polar Impact, which is a organization, a grassroots organization that I volunteer with. And I've talked a lot about changing our perspective and really seeing things through different lenses. And Polar Impact is an example of that at a different angle. So they're an inclusive network of racial and ethnic minorities and allies in the polar research community. And their mission is to support, connect, and highlight the stories of Black, Asian, Indigenous, people of color, and minority ethnic professionals in the polar research community, and just anyone who works in Antarctica and the Arctic. So they're a really great organization. Definitely check them out. The other shout out, I have shameless self-promotion of a book I have coming out this year called Out There, the Science Behind Sci-Fi Film and TV. So I know I haven't really talked about science fiction that much in this talk, but this book actually, I document some of the ways in which Antarctica is informative of how we might explore the cosmos and how that ties into science fiction. So it's a really great illustrated book that's coming out later this year that you can pre-order now. And the foreword was written by astronaut Mae Jemison. So it's really cool. It's not all Antarctica, but there's definitely some stories about how Antarctica can form things like how we cope with isolation and other factors that show up in sci-fi and space. So finally, my newsletter that I've been writing here for the past 2 months in Antarctica, you can get it by scanning this QR code. Definitely subscribe and also check out the archive. A lot more photos of my time here and stories about what it's like here in Antarctica. So definitely check that out if you want more behind-the-scenes stuff. And also if you want to get notified about the docuseries that I'm filming once it eventually comes out. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to go into questions.
Wow, that was so fascinating, and those animals are so cool. I want to just remind folks that they can drop their questions into the Q&A box on Zoom. And so I'm just going to start with a question about so we call it the McMurdo Dry Valleys, I guess. Let me phrase it this way. So do you get rain? Is there precipitation in the dry valleys, or is it like a desert that we think of maybe here in the US?
So yeah, it's definitely a polar desert. It has not rained in the dry valleys. That's not been recorded. But it does lightly snow sometimes. So another helicopter coming in here. I should like rotate around so you can see the helicopter pad behind me a bit, just to go off topic. But it does snow lightly in the dry valleys, but very little. It is properly a desert. It's very, very dry out there. We don't really see any big weather events in terms of precipitation. The snowstorms there are very light snowstorms. It does get super windy, and we have recorded in this past year like an unusual warming event that happened in March. But in terms of precipitation, it's slowly, gradually getting a little bit wetter there, but it's very much a desert.
All right. So it's a desert, unlike I know we had some people from the West, so different kind of desert that maybe they're picturing over there where you are in Antarctica. So you showed us a little bit about what's behind you, but can you just tell us what we're seeing? I see flags. I think I saw some sea ice behind you. I see, is that uphill?
Yeah, so behind me is uphill. It's this great large hill at McMurdo Station. McMurdo Station, for those that don't know, is the largest station in Antarctica. So that's why you hear helicopters and machinery and everything. There's actually a lot of people here at the peak of summer. Behind me is a building that's used to like welcome people and has a lot of international flags of countries that are signatories of the Antarctic Treaty. I'm gonna rotate around here. Here you can just see some miscellaneous buildings, but behind me over here is the helicopter pad. So you can see that. And actually right now a piston bully is pulling up right behind me. And piston bullies are really unique machines that are used to go over the sea ice and traverse different distances here. So this piston bully, I've ridden in it to go across the sea ice, to follow teams that have robots that go under the sea ice and look at the underside of glaciers. They're really the workhorses around here, and that's what's causing the noise in the background right now. So again, rotating out here, then you can sort of see the sea ice. And behind me, if you were to keep going generally that direction, you'd go to the dry valleys in maybe 45 minutes in a helicopter. And so if I keep rotating around a little bit, here you can see some more of the buildings in McMurdo, and the Science Support Center. And so you can see there's actually a lot of infrastructure here in McMurdo Station. So not totally out here alone.
You're not alone. That's right. McMurdo Station, I think, has close to 1,000 people right now. When it comes to the research you're doing, how are you seeing or maybe not seeing the changing climate? Have you seen that in your experiences, or have you heard from the researchers you're working with about, you mentioned the dry valleys, it is getting a little bit wetter. So how is climate change impacting this region?
Yeah, it's really unique. You know, a lot of people make assumptions that Antarctica is going to go the way of the Arctic, but Antarctica is a continent and it has its own way of dealing with things. So you can't really apply anything that's happening anywhere else and just say, oh, that's what will also happen to Antarctica. And that's why it's so important to do research here. Sorry, I've got hair in my mouth being in the wind. And so all the research that's being done here is to try and figure that out. And each location is entirely different. So with the dry valleys, actually, even though we've been looking at it for decades and have a lot of data on it, it's sort of been described as a flag in the wind in terms of like which direction it would go due to climate change. And only in the last few years have we been able to really see there is a trend that it is getting warmer, it is getting wetter, and it is also getting windier. And all of these have implications for what will happen to the dry valleys over time. We don't know definitively, but that's why we're doing this research. It's to try to figure out how this ecosystem might change. Long term, a warmer, wetter climate in the dry valleys might mean that other microbes can survive there. And so the reason why there's only like a handful of really hardy microscopic animals in the dry valleys is because Antarctica is like a huge barrier. We know that microbes get tossed around in the wind, and some of them eventually do get transported to Antarctica, but they die immediately. And so if Antarctica becomes warmer and wetter, it's not necessarily that you're immediately going to see die off to creatures that can get cope with the weather, but you might see die off because other creatures arrive here, and then there's more competition for resources. There's different types of creatures they've never had to fight with for those resources, or that might eat them, different types of predators that can come in. And so that's why it's so important to keep doing this research, because we don't exactly know how that's going to play out, but we have suspicions about which direction it can go.
Awesome. Well, that's really interesting. And I'm sure over the years, we'll just keep learning, keep collecting data. So someone's asked about the size range of the tardigrades. Personally, I love tardigrades. I think they're the cutest, but maybe you can just tell us generally the microscopic organisms. What is the size range we're talking about? You mentioned it a little bit, but it'd be great to hear a little bit more about it.
Typically, they're between like 1/4 of a millimeter to 1 millimeter in size. I very rarely see them as large as 1 millimeter. Usually they're closer to like 1/4 or 1/3 of a millimeter in size.
All right. So they are definitely small. So what would you say has been the coolest thing you photographed? Someone's asking that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the tardigrades are pretty great to look at. I do love filming them because they kind of seem to have their own, I don't know, you can sort of see like personalities in them. And that's just me speaking. Like, I don't know that they actually have personalities as we will describe them, but watching their behaviors and watching them walk around, it's just really delightful. I don't know, you kind of bond with them over time. So I love filming all these creatures, but tardigrades are probably up there on my favorites.
I don't think, yeah, you're not alone with that. So obviously you are part of one research team out there in the dry valleys, and we know it's the LTER, so there are multiple projects, but someone's asking, what other research do you find interesting going on in Antarctica from the scientists you've interacted with on station or read about or seen?
There's so much. I mean, I would have to go through the whole list, but I mean, people are part of the reason I love coming to Antarctica. Like, part of it's the landscape and the interesting ecosystem, but the other part of it are the people and the research. And there's so many people. There's some people who dive below the frozen lakes in the dry valleys and study the organisms deep under these really weird frozen lakes that do amazing research. Out here, there's also people who study penguins from space. So they are looking at satellite images of penguins, and they can see them from space. And what they do is they'll come down here and they'll fly over a penguin colony and take lots and lots of photos of that penguin colony, and then they'll manually count all the penguins we see, and then we match that up to how many penguins they can count from a satellite view in order to better train machine learning for looking at satellite data and tracking penguins. I think that's really awesome. I mentioned also there's a team that has a robot that goes under the sea ice to look at the underside of glaciers. That's Iceless. Just so many amazing things here. Probably more than I can list, but yeah, I think that's the really exciting thing about doing this type of research, getting to be around people doing entirely different types of research here.
Yeah. When you said penguins from space, I just imagined a penguin with like a spacesuit on, is the first thing that I thought of. Now, you mentioned microbial maps, and you show us some pictures and video, which I think are really cool. We have a question from one of our audience members about if there are things like snow algae or moss even, or soil algae in the dry valleys, if you've seen any, or it's completely devoid of that.
Yeah, great question. So here in McMurdo, underneath the sea ice, I have seen snow algae. I have seen watermelon snow, which is just really, really cool. Fascinating stuff. I won't go into it now, but if you haven't heard of watermelon snow, Google it. There's great resources out there. But in the dry valleys, I have not seen any watermelon snow or anything of that nature. But there is moss at a very small scale in the dry valleys. So that's also why you see some tardigrades there.
All right, so it is there. Now, I do want to switch gears a little bit, because we've gotten some questions just about what life is like for you in Antarctica. So it's the summer, you've got 24 hours of daylight. What is it like to eat, sleep, live in Antarctica, both at McMurdo Station, but also when you're out in the dry valleys?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first word is cold. Like super cold right now. It's super windy. So even at the height of summer, it's kind of intense here. But when I'm in McMurdo Station, life is pretty comfortable. I have a dorm with a bed. We have a cafeteria. We get 3 meals a day that are cooked for us. It's kind of pretty cushy. But out in the dry valleys, I'll only be out there with like 6 other people maybe, and then we're all sleeping in tents. We're cooking our own food and everything. It's camping, and it's really cold to go to sleep in the dry valley. You have to dress super warm, and sometimes it's just a little intense. Is that you have to like get your hand warmers and get hot water bottles. And do a lot of things in order to stay warm. So typically when I'm here, I spend a few days in McMurdo, and then I spend a few days out in the dry valleys, and I kind of go back and forth.
All right. So speaking of, I know it's cold for you, but what are you wearing? What is that gear keeping you warm? So I did see it's about 16 degrees and 1 degree with wind chill. So how many layers do you have? I'm sure it's probably close to 5 or 6 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I need more layers. So I have really huge boots on that are protecting my feet. I've got toe warmers on. Right now, I've only got 2 layers of pants on. I am kind of wishing I had 3 layers of pants on. I do have 3 layers here at the top. So I've got, my base layer shirt. I've got a fleece layer shirt, and then I've got the extreme cold weather gear, which is this parka. I've also got mittens that have hand warmers in them, and mittens are actually way warmer than having gloves. And so, yeah, I'm doing as much as I can to stay warm.
Well, we want to definitely keep you warm. I agree. I'm team mittens over gloves every day. So you've been to Antarctica before. This is a second trip for you. And someone has noted that you mentioned in your blog that nobody goes to Antarctica twice.
Right.
So now that you are finishing up this second trip, looks like people are loading up that piston bully behind you. Would you come back? Do you want to come back? Do you have the Antarctic bug, or are you thinking I'll stick to the warmth?
I absolutely want to come back. I mean, right now, after a couple of months here, I'm like ready for some summer weather, in New Zealand. But I'm happy to come back because it's so amazing here. And there's just the type of work here you can do really nowhere else in the world. So yeah, I'm cold. I don't like being cold, but for science and for amazing work, it's totally worth it.
All right, so we'll see you back there again for sure. And on that note, someone's just asking about getting jobs down there and how people join, what kind of jobs. You're part of a research team, but can you talk a little bit about what other job opportunities there are for folks who might want to join you on the ice one year?
There's all sorts of positions. So on the research team, a lot of times grad students are the ones that are coming down here, postdocs sometimes. So finding researchers who are doing Antarctic work and starting conversations with them. If you're a student and interested in pursuing that, that's a great way to get started. Send people an email, say that you're a fan of their work and that you are interested in learning like how to get started. But there's all types of jobs here. We here in McMurdo, we have plumbers, we have electricians, carpenters, people who are working in the cafeteria. Really, it's a small town, so all the jobs that you would expect in a small town kind of exist here too. And so that's always an opportunity to get down to Antarctica. And the National Science Foundation works with a number of contractors who have job postings. So Lidos and others, all part of the Antarctic support contract. You can Google that and find current job openings and apply.
Awesome. Yeah. And all of that is on the websites, usap.gov. At the end of this, for folks who are curious, we'll have that website online. Up on the screen so you can take a look. We got a question, and I don't know enough about snow and glaciers, but someone's asked if you see dust over the snow and glaciers.
Yeah, so those cryogonite holes I was talking about, that happens because dust and dirt get blown on top of that glacier. And because that dust and dirt is slightly darker in color, it begins to melt down, and that's what creates those cryogonite holes. Those dark pieces of dirt melt down into the glacier. But with those dark pieces of dirt and dust are microscopic animals. And so they get blown around with it too. And then they end up living inside the glacier.
All right. Well, I know you're cold and we're getting to the top of our next hour. So I want to just leave you with, is there anything that you want to share with our folks who have joined in that maybe we haven't talked about yet, or you're just a fact that you think is fascinating you want to share? What do you want to let us know?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's just to change our perspective that Antarctica is full of life. And the dry valleys, we're finding life in the glaciers, in the soils, in the frozen lakes, inside of rocks. There's even microscopic creatures that live off of the air. They get blown around in the air. So it's really something that even as I have been here, I came here saying, oh, there's a lot of life here in Antarctica. I want to show it. But even being here a second time, it still blows my mind just how much life there is if you know how to look for it in the dry valleys. And it really teaches us how life can survive in extremes here on Earth and the implications that might have for life elsewhere. And if nothing else, for understanding our own planet and providing another puzzle piece to our existence here.
Wow, that's a great place to end. We're going to just throw up one last slide for our attendees where they can check out some resources, just waiting for that to come up, and we will leave it up. Thanks, Hannah. We will leave it up for a minute here. There we go. So again, Ariel, we have Ariel's website and the McMurdo Dry Valleys LTER website on there. USAP.gov is a great place where you can find out all about the U.S. Antarctic program, and obviously NSF on social media. In the next few days, as I mentioned at the top of our session, we will be sending out an email with even more resources for you. I'm going to include the resources that Ariel provided at the end of her presentation as well. So hopefully you can learn about Antarctica and the McMurdo Dry Valleys and keep exploring. So with that, we're going to leave the slide up for folks who want to take some notes, use the QR code. And we will let Ariel go warm up. We will see you later this afternoon, Ariel. And thank you to everybody who was able to join us today. We're so happy that you made some time to hang out with us.
Thanks, everyone.